San Diego, California, what's not to love? A vibrant downtown with tons of attractions, one of America's busiest light rail systems. And don't be a hater, this part is objectively true. The best weather you can find in any major US city. But dig a bit deeper and you've got ruinously expensive housing, tons of suburban sprawl, and still just way too much car-centric design. In other words, welcome to the state of California. So there's a lot to talk about in San Diego, and I'm going to get to all of it, but the day after I left, California's Senate Bill 79 passed, so there's a glimmer of hope, and we'll talk about how that might play out in a place like San Diego. First of all, for all you non-SoCal viewers, let's get you oriented to the geography of San Diego because it is a lot to take in. It's the 18th largest metro area in the US, and it's almost hidden because of the way it's dwarfed by its neighboring urban agglomeration 100 miles north. But San Diego itself, as a city proper, is the 8th largest city in the US, population 1.4 million. But as we're going to see, that's not because it's particularly dense, but because of how geographically large the city is, due to lots of annexations over the last several decades that push the city limits north into areas that have a pretty recognizably suburban form. A side-by-side comparison with Philadelphia, roughly the same population, will kind of help you visualize what I'm talking about. So as I usually do, I'm going to focus on the city proper today, but even more so, I'm going to focus on the parts of San Diego that have city-like qualities, areas that are transit accessible and/or are reasonably close into the city center. And this is a shame because there are lots of really enjoyable parts of Greater San Diego that don't fit those criteria. Like, this is about as good a major US city as there is for proximity to great beaches, maybe second behind Honolulu. And a lot of the beach communities are pretty walkable once you get there, but for the most part, they're kind of tough to access without a car. So for today's exploration, I want to start with downtown San Diego, and I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. Last time I was here was 2021, which was rough everywhere, but even on prior visits to the city, downtown San Diego didn't feel like a place you would necessarily want to live or spend a lot of time. But in 2025, there's a lot more dense residential than I was expecting, and the different pieces, like the Embarcadero, the Marina District, and the Gas Lamp Quarter, feel more well-defined and better connected than I remember. And the Padres ballpark feels better and better integrated into the overall downtown fabric. Also, on the north side of downtown, Little Italy, probably the most pedestrian-centered place in the whole city. It seems extremely successful, you just kind of wonder why more of San Diego isn't like this. By the way, you'll notice a lot of footage here shot by bike. It is how I got around the city for the most part, and I'll get into that in more detail later in the video because there's a lot to say. Like all the cities I visit, San Diego is far too big and complicated to be able to cover everything that's interesting in a single video. Santa Fe Depot, I had ambitions of taking the coaster north to get some views and check out some more beach communities, but it's gonna have to wait for a future visit. Instead, I wanted to focus on transit inside the city proper, which number one means I spent a lot of time face to face with San Diego's finest injury attorney. But number two, it means I spent a lot of time riding the San Diego trolley, which I think is not actually a trolley by anyone's definition, but is one of the stronger light rail systems in the US. I wanted to get a sense of what's developing around the blue and the green lines as you get north and east of the city. Let's look at the blue line first. It really hugs the I-5 right away all the way up to its northern terminus, where it finally curls off on an elevated alignment toward University Town Center. There is some newish residential density in the area, but it doesn't really interface with the light rail station directly, and it's just not a super walkable environment. The main access to UTC station is really from the top deck of one of the parking structures at the Westfield UTC shopping mall, which means that if you're visiting the mall, you basically have to walk farther to get to the light rail than you would to wherever the most distantly parked car is. Kind of sends a message, but it's consistent with a lot of the land use along the blue line. You'll often find yourself looking out the window and into the back of a parking garage. The green line, I didn't get all the way out to the end, but I wanted to see what's underway at Snapdragon Stadium. This is the old Jack Murphy site from when San Diego had an NFL team. The old stadium was demolished in 2020 and replaced by a smaller footprint stadium that hosts college football and pro soccer. And there's been planning underway for a while to build out a transit-oriented mixed-use district on some of the excess land on the site with thousands of new housing units. You can actually start to see some construction activity on the massive decommissioned parking lot east of the stadium. I'm interested in coming back in a couple years to see how it's shaping up. Also, without question, I had to stop at Fashion Valley, San Diego's premier purveyor of simulated urbanism. It's definitely accessible from the Green Line, but yes, the station platform connects all the way at the back of the top deck of one of the mall's many parking structures. Structured parking is not cheap to build, and I can't tell you exactly how much exists at Fashion Valley, but I can tell you that the garages go up to at least the letter H, and this one appears to have at least 1,000 stalls. And if you're riding the Green Line, you'll get a spectacular view of just an endless chain of similar structures. I'm not sure what the mode split is for Fashion Valley visitors, but I feel like I know what's being incentivized. Okay, so often when I visit a city to make a video, I start with a plan, and then after I spend a day or so experiencing what the city has to offer, that plan changes. And it's right at about this point that I had to make an executive decision that I was not going to spend one more second in Mission Valley or anywhere north. So you'll notice that the modern light rail in San Diego is called the trolley. And I think the way the name invokes the historic streetcars of the late 19th and early 20th century is very intentional. As you're going to see, the inner part of San Diego is very much a collection of streetcar suburbs that developed around rail transit, so much so that it's common to see references to the San Diego Electric Railway Network and historical markers in neighborhoods around the city. Now, ironically, these streetcar suburbs tend to be exactly the places that aren't served by modern light rail, but they do have a very walkable built environment, lots of typical streetcar era architecture, and it's really these neighborhoods I wanted to dig into today. One thing you'll notice right away, the city goes crazy on these gateway treatments in the neighborhoods. They're very into the idea that all of these places are villages with their own unique identity. I kind of don't like the village terminology because I feel like it implies or fixes the expectation of a low density, almost pastoral setting that I don't think is appropriate at all for close-in areas of one of our nation's most expensive cities. But we'll talk more about that when we get into housing questions. I'm not going to talk about these close-in neighborhoods individually, but not having spent a whole lot of time in San Diego previously, outside of downtown and Balboa Park, they're kind of a revelation, each centered around a largely intact legacy streetcar corridor. One thing you can't help noticing though, some of the neighborhoods north of downtown sit right beneath the final approach to San Diego International. I talked to a few people who live in South Park in particular, and they insist you really just stop noticing it pretty quickly, but I'm skeptical. This is something I've thought about a lot, particularly since I started the channel, and I guess I'm firmly in the airports shouldn't be close into cities camp for a lot of reasons. But also know that if you come to San Diego, it's extremely straightforward to get downtown on transit. The 992 stops at both terminals. It runs the same schedule 7 days a week, every 15 minutes for most times you'd want to use it. The vehicles come equipped with luggage racks, and the trip downtown is geographically extremely short. It's like 3 miles. Now, it does run in mixed traffic, so it can be a little unreliable, but you're probably not going to be here for more than 20 minutes. I did do this entire trip without using a single ride hail, which is something I can't say for any trip I've ever taken to, say, Los Angeles. Okay, a lot more to come because, well, it is California and we absolutely have to talk about land use and housing supply. And if you didn't notice by now, I got around San Diego mostly by bike. I was actually in town on the invitation of Bike SD, which is an organization that advocates for safer biking infrastructure and is working to grow the city's biking culture. I did my usual in-person thing at the Adams Avenue Theater up in Normal Heights, packed house, and a super fun crowd. Also, thanks to the good folks at Bike SD for lending me my trusty steed for the trip. We did a group ride through Balboa Park and some of the neighborhoods the evening I got into town. You know, I'm never quite sure how much I'm actually going to use a bike when someone lends me one, but I have to say, biking in San Diego is amazing, not because the infrastructure is great, it's definitely a mixed bag, as you've probably already gathered, but the weather for biking is just so freaking great all the time. Like, I spent a significant amount of time wondering if San Diegans even own rain gear, or for that matter, any clothing item with long sleeves. The humidity is super low, like for me, this is the perfect weather for biking year-round, so why on earth would the city not double down on that? Anyway, I feel like San Diego would be the easiest possible place to not be an advocate because the location and the natural environment are already giving you so much, so I have the deepest respect for all the people here who can envision something better and are ready to fight for it. So if you want to get involved in making San Diego a truly great bike city, which in my opinion, it has no business not being, consider getting involved or donating, link down in the description. So let's talk about this. It's not always easy biking in an unfamiliar city. I generally rely on Google directions to give me something that's at least close to an ideal route for getting from point A to point B, and then I just go. Like, I don't have time to do a whole research project every time I want to bike somewhere and street view every single street on my route to verify that the facilities are safe. I find what Google will do is recommend a route that's mostly good, and there is some good protected bike infrastructure in San Diego, but the problem is there are a lot of gaps. So inevitably, Google will funnel you right into terrible or non-existent infrastructure where you have to do a pretty rapid cost-benefit analysis to weigh your mortality risk against your desire to get where you're trying to go efficiently. Or it might guide you onto the waterfront promenade downtown, which is technically a shared bike ped facility, but in practice, you're gonna want to slow down to like 4 miles an hour, unless you're a sociopath. Like, I can't stress enough that this should be the perfect city for biking, but there just needs to be a lot more protected infrastructure to connect downtown and all the great inner neighborhoods. Again, some of it is very good, but if it's not a complete network, then you're putting people in harm's way. Still too many bike lanes that are right in the door zone. Still too many nominally protected or buffered bike lanes that are too easy for drivers to use for parking or loading zones. And apparently not enough enforcement because I ran into way too much of this. Although most of the time the protected bike lane was obstructed, it was because they had it shut down because they were building new residential density, so I couldn't even be that mad. Although I do have to question some of the temporary traffic control protocol and flagging procedures, since I feel like this guy was waving me through, but a little advice for everyone playing at home. Always look over your shoulder just in case. Also, even quote-unquote protected bike lanes aren't really protected when you get to an intersection or driveway. This isn't even a San Diego specific thing, but it is SoCal, so you're best off assuming drivers are going to be aggressive and oblivious, which is not a combination of attributes you'd hope for, but unfortunately, you just don't have that much choice in the matter. So there's still too much stuff like bike lanes that disappear when you get to a traffic circle and you have to merge in at the last second. Sharrows on collector roads that have high design speeds. Some of this you can sort of understand, like here on Robinson in the Hillcrest area. There are a very limited number of structures that cross the canyon where they built State Route 163, and the structures are old and constrained, but sometimes the sharrows are in places where it seems like the city just didn't have the gumption to take out parking or a travel lane. Like if you ask Google for bike directions from Hillcrest to North Park, it'll almost certainly put you on University Avenue, which is nominally a bike route, but it's really a stroad with sharrows in the outside lanes. I guess someone at some point figured if they slapped up speed limit signs that say 20 miles an hour, then their job is done. I didn't come out here with a radar gun, but you can watch and decide for yourself how compliance is going. I'm pretty sure city planners know better than this, but somehow it just keeps happening anyway. Again, this is not unique to San Diego. It's just so frustrating because my feeling is this should be the #1 bike city in America. Let me show you one thing that I think is unique though. This bike cattle chute that runs along the Green Line near the San Diego Convention Center in the Gaslamp Quarter. Like, I spent days trying to escape trial attorney Gomez, which is not an easy task because he appears to have bought out just about every bus shelter and transit vehicle wrap in greater San Diego. And I was absolutely determined to outrun him this time, but it just wasn't in the cards. What's the saying? If you can't beat them, give them copious amounts of free advertising in your YouTube video. Now, as you look at some of this bike footage, you will notice that there are certain corridors outside of downtown where you'll see a good amount of new housing density, but it's more the exception than the rule. So 4th and 5th Avenues between downtown and the Hillcrest neighborhood, there's lots of new residential and lots of cranes in the air. But contrast 30th Avenue through North Park, there's a good amount of intact streetcar era urban form that is part of what makes it an attractive neighborhood, and you're less likely to see redeveloped. But there are also stretches of 30th that have frontage that's just maddeningly underutilized. And then even where there is new residential development, it doesn't feel like it's nearly enough. Like, for a lot of cities, I don't even think building 5/1s is as aggressive as you need to be. But in North Park, they build 2/1s. I don't even live in San Diego, but it just makes me unreasonably angry. Like, there are taller residential structures in North Park, but the most imposing building in the whole neighborhood is probably the public parking garage at 30th and University. It's like when the city finally had a big opportunity site in the heart of this high-demand neighborhood, this is what the priority was. And I think the key is North Park has these great streetcar-era commercial streets, but there isn't nearly enough population density in the neighborhood to actually support all these businesses and make the streets bustle with pedestrian activity. So instead of adding density, I guess the strategy is to get people to drive there from other neighborhoods. I have to believe city planners know better than this, but it feels like there's a long history of doubling down on car dependence. But that's California. Better weather than Barcelona, and land use that's 100 times worse. It still feels like we're in a place where having marginally more density in your backyard is a crime against humanity, but having a massive public parking garage in your backyard is just as God intended. So enter California Senate Bill 79, signed into law by Governor Newsom on October 10th, literally the day after I left San Diego. SB 79 makes it legal to build higher density multifamily housing in close proximity to major transit stops, including light rail and bus rapid transit. It's interesting legislation to nerd out on, not the least because of the nuts and bolts of defining what light rail and bus rapid transit are, because they are slightly squishy terms, and also what constitutes close proximity. For example, does the Route 215 Mid-City Rapid Bus qualify? I mean, it has dedicated lanes, sometimes. It has a lot of the features we associate with bus rapid transit, but also it runs on El Cajon Boulevard, which is a wide arterial that carries a lot of traffic. In a lot of ways, not an ideal place to put a lot of housing density in terms of air quality, noise, street safety. Like, this is my favorite of all the gateway treatments. It's not even a neighborhood. It's just the boulevard, and this, I think, is an area that should benefit from SB 79. I think the legislation is going to be a difference maker, but I just hope that as dense multifamily gets filled in, we try to make it so as few of the new residents as possible are forced to own a car to get the places they want to go. Like just across the street, for example. So much hostility. You know, when I go to a city, I always put a question out on social media and Patreon in advance. What should I cover while I'm visiting the city? And for San Diego, there were way too many people who said, talk about how the city is carved up by freeways. But I didn't want to dwell on the extremely bad ideas from California's past when there's so much to be excited about for the future. But if you just can't help yourself, I highly recommend the podcast Freeway Exit. It's San Diego based, but I think the insights and the lessons are broadly applicable, and it's just really well done. And on that note, final stop, let's go south of downtown to Barrio Logan, historically the heart of San Diego's Mexican-American community. Spiritually, still probably the case, but populations don't stay fixed in one location over time. Still a good spot if you need a solid Mexican supermercado, or if you want to stand online for some of the local cuisine, and this city will not disappoint on food if you do your homework. You know Barrio Logan is a neighborhood in San Diego because it does have a highly conspicuous parking garage, but also don't miss Chicano Park, which is kind of a showstopper. On the one hand, it's murals on the support piers of the freeway that bypasses Barrio Logan, serving commuters traveling across San Diego Bay to and from the affluent city of Coronado. On the other hand, a legitimately important site in the Chicano movement and the freeway revolts of the late 60s and early 70s. So kind of inspiring and dystopian at the same time, which I don't think of as a contradiction. It's 2025 and we have to be able to hold two thoughts in our heads at the same time. And that was kind of my San Diego experience. I spent half the time riding around the city thinking, man, this is just such a beautiful place. How could you ever live here and complain about anything? And the other half of the time, I was just filled with an incandescent rage that is just not characteristic for me at all. I mean, if ever there was a US city that should be designed so you can walk and bike everywhere and not have to deal with the absolute soul-crushing misery and quality of life sinkhole that is traffic congestion, San Diego should be it. There are lots of people out here trying to do the right thing. I mean, hundreds of them turned out for my event up in Normal Heights, but the city just makes it so much more difficult than it has to be. You want to know what my SoCal moment of zen was? This person navigating the Jack in the Box drive-thru on their Bach feet. San Diego, just keep on keeping on. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for your direct support. I just could not do what I do every week without you all. And definitely thanks to Bike SD for having me out. I will come back anytime. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.